Right. Last May, my son Ross Ulbricht was sentenced to double life without parole for all nonviolent charges. First-time offender. This is a harsher sentence than most murderers, kidnappers, rapists, child pornographers get. So, of course, Ross and his attorneys filed an appeal for the sentence and his conviction. Last January, submitted. It was an epic document. It's 170 pages, which they had to get special permission because it's about 2.5 times the length of the average appeal. And they said they could have put a whole lot more in there. There were so many violations at trial. And this document, this brief, not only defends Ross, it really defends all of our Americans' due process rights and our right to a fair trial. Now, it's a long brief, but the government outdid us. They submitted an even longer brief in response to the appeal. It's 186 pages of basically, in my opinion, formulaic government text that I've been working through now for the last several days. Not easy to read that stuff. The basic argument they have is that the judge committed absolutely no errors or mistakes, and even if she did, they were harmless, and that any adverse rulings against Ross were solely the defense's fault. And the reason they give, you can be sure it's true, because the government says so. Now, one of the main issues in the appeal is the suppression of evidence. And it involves these two men. They're government agents, Carl Force and Sean Bridges. They were at the core of the Silk Road investigation in Maryland for 2 years. And they are now in prison for using their access to the Silk Road site to steal over $1 million. But not only did they steal, but they were computer experts. They had high-level access to the site, administrative functions. And so they basically had what one journalist called the keys to the kingdom. So they had access to passwords. They could change PIN numbers. They could commandeer accounts, including DPRs. They could act as DPR. They also had many other aliases. They had the means to manipulate and create logs, chats. They could delete, edit, and create chats, private messages, anything on the forum and in the marketplace. They had keys, so posts on the forum, they could change, they could write. Access to account information, bank accounts. I mean, basically, they could do pretty much anything they wanted. In addition, Carl Force, one of those agents, played the single biggest role in the allegations that Ross organized murder for hire. This is a corrupt agent whose word we're supposed to take that this chat occurred, and no murders ever happened. And in fact, Ross was never charged with this, despite what you might read in the media. And here's a quote directly from the prosecution saying, "The defendant has not been charged, and there are no murders." And yet, he spoke about it for hours at the trial. And they relied heavily on it and its sentencing. The sentence was somewhat justified by the judge due to these uncharged crimes. And now in the government's response, they have a section called Ulbricht's Willingness to Use Violence to Protect His Interests in Silk Road. These are unproven and uncharged allegations. And in the appeal, and in an amicus brief submitted by Drug Policy Alliance and supported by a former federal judge, Nancy Gertner, and LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and Just Leadership USA, they say, look, it's not right to use uncharged, unproven allegations to sentence someone to life. It's supposed to be, addressed by a jury in a courtroom. And I've always just had the question, if Ross is guilty, why don't you charge him for it? They're not shy about charging lots of stuff. They don't hold back on that. But the worst part of it was that the court stopped the jury from knowing a thing about these government agents, these corrupt agents, and that they even existed. It was not allowed to be mentioned at trial. And this is a violation of very well-established law called the Brady Rule, which says a prosecutor cannot hide any evidence that is favorable to a defendant. But the government said, well, we won't let anybody see the Brady material because there is no Brady material. And if there were, we'd disclose this. And you know that because you can trust us. Because a lot of the material's sealed. We don't know what's in there. And they insist also that anything to do with Carl Force is irrelevant. And yet they accuse Ross of hiring Force, and that they admit he had administrative access, but they've kept the material sealed. Now, if it's irrelevant, why is it sealed? And if it's not exculpatory, which is favorable to Ross, then why can't we, or at least the defense, see it? It's not even clear if the judge has seen the sealed evidence in order to decide if it was relevant or not. And the government says, well, she was correct in trusting the government to tell the truth. She didn't need to see that sealed evidence. And the judge said, yeah, there was no particularized need to unseal the corruption evidence. And the government then said also in their response, anyway, despite all that, it's not relevant because New York's investigation and Maryland's investigation were totally separate. They had nothing to do with each other. There was no communication, even though initially they provided several exhibits that were based on Carl Force's evidence that they had, and later they redacted them. And they refer to Force in many of his persona that he used on the site, but he had nothing to do with it. In addition, this man, he's a senior agent in Homeland Security, and he told Ian Duncan of the Baltimore Sun that, the Maryland agents did work with the New York FBI. They cooperated. They split up tasks. New York worked on encryption. Maryland was tasked with, we don't know who tasked them, but someone tasked them with developing informants and setting up drug busts. He said the two teams began to try to figure out what each had, and everyone had a little piece of the puzzle, and then it was time to sit at the table and put it together. And he said they did it through a series of conferences and phone calls. So either he's lying or the government's lying now, because he's saying they cooperated. And the government also says, even so, even if they did work together, which they didn't, but even if they did, it didn't taint the evidence at all. The Force had freewheeling access and bridges to the Silk Road site and material. And the reason that they give is, well, the usual one, because the government says so. We know because the government says so. And anyway, it would have been unfair to the government and wrong to the judge, to allow the defense to tell the jury about the corrupt federal agents, because then the jury might have doubted the integrity of the government's case. And that would have hurt the government's case. And when the evidence really wasn't relevant, that wouldn't be fair. And the government's repeatedly stated that the evidence was not relevant, so that must be true because the government says so. That's what they say. They forgot the part that says a defendant doesn't have to prove his innocence in court. That's up to the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty. The defendant has no burden of proof at all, and Casting doubt on the government's job is the defense's job. That's what they do. That's what it's all about. But they said it isn't fair. Another issue in the in the appeal, was suppression of evidence. Was block cross-examination. We have the suppression of evidence. As if that's not enough, we have block cross-examination. So it involved this agent, Jared Draconian, who was on Silk Road for 2 years, thousands of hours, and he believed there were many DPRs. I heard him testify to that in trial. But he was honing in on one particular individual. He had a big file on him. He had sworn affidavits. He thought he was DPR, and that was Mark Karpeles. And he built a substantial case, and this was coming out in cross-examination. Now, he's a government witness. This is based on government evidence, not defense. But what happened was the Department of Homeland Security in Baltimore, where the corrupt agents were operating, they met with Karpeles' lawyers. This came out in trial, and the lawyers offered them a deal. They said, look, we'll give you a name. We'll give you DPR's name. Just back off our client. 2 weeks later, Ross was arrested, and they no longer were pursuing Karpeles. This was all coming out, and at that moment, the prosecutor jumped up. He's like, objection, this has got to stop right now. We cannot continue with this questioning. Stop now. And the judge kind of argued with him, and she's like, well, this is relevant. Why not? This is valid. What's the deal? And he argued and argued to the point where she said, okay, I'll send the jury home an hour early so we can get to the bottom of this. The defense had another hour of questioning of this agent to go. And she said she was doing this in the interest of justice. Now, the defense at that point cited that same Brady Rule. We're coming up with evidence that's favorable to the defendant. You can't block this. And she actually agreed. And she went on to say that the agent's testimony, it was highly relevant. She said it was directly relevant. These are quotes from the transcript. She said it was obviously relevant, clearly relevant, obviously highly relevant, and that getting to an alternate perpetrator was in the heartland of the defense, and that the fact that Karpeles could be a DPR has come out in spades. And these are quotes. And at that point, he kept arguing, and finally she said, look, that cat's out of the bag, court adjourned, the Karpeles thing is out of the bag. And we all went home. And when I came back, we all came back on the following Tuesday. It was a long weekend. It was a totally different courtroom with totally different rules. So all that testimony from Draconian was now stricken from the record. The jury was told to forget they ever heard it. And there were now new rules about what could and could not be asked in the courtroom by the defense. So, very strict boundaries. So, for instance, question, and she specified these questions. Did you suspect Mark Karpeles? That is now off limits. You cannot ask that question. Did you believe Mark Karpeles was DPR? That's off limits. Do you suspect that Mark Karpeles operated Silk Road? Off limits. And that offer that Karpeles' lawyer made to DHS Baltimore, we'll give you a name, that's not relevant. So here we have day 3. Everything's all relevant and obviously relevant. And then day 4, forget you ever heard it. And one of her reasons she gave, this alternate perpetrator, this might just confuse the jury. And our lawyer, Joshua Draytell, said, my defense has been eviscerated, or as Forbes wrote, completely derailed. Well, in its response to the appeal, because of course this is an issue in the appeal, the government said, well, the trial judge correctly cut off Draconian's testimony. That was correct to do that about Karpeles, because discussion about the government's investigation of Karpeles as an alternate perpetrator, it was irrelevant. Why was it irrelevant? Well, I guess you can guess, because the government says it was irrelevant. That's literally what they say. So, cat's back in the bag. And the appeal addresses this and other instances of block cross-examinations. I mean, the government brought in a string of federal agents talking about, you know, the computer, the laptop. Their protocol has been criticized by experts and said it's highly questionable. One of the agents said in court, he admitted he didn't follow the guidelines when he was investigating it. And when the defense attempted to cross-examine these guys, they were either curtailed or shut down. The judge kept limiting him in what he could ask them and find out. And finally she goes, look, if you want to know about this, bring your own witness. Put somebody else on the stand. Well, at this point, our lawyer called for a mistrial because it's not the defense's burden, it's not the defendant's burden to prove anything again. They have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Of course, she denied the mistrial, but you would think a judge would understand the burden of proof in a trial. But anyway, because she said to bring one, and it looked like the only way to get anything answered, the defense did bring someone. Stephen Bellavin, expert in computer networking, security, he's from Columbia University. And he was prepared to challenge the government's testimony, which was very flawed, and explain many technical issues to the jury, many of whom were extremely low-tech, including the lack of security of open ports, which Ross was on when he was arrested, how timestamps can be changed. They relied a lot on timestamps, and this happened when, and so forth. They can be changed. And there were even some questions about the timestamps in the trial. And basically why complex technology of hidden websites make it almost impossible to be able to prove anything. But he was blocked. He was not allowed to testify. And one of the reasons that the judge gave was, well, this case doesn't require special technical knowledge. They also brought a Bitcoin expert he was a federal agent, former, who done one other case, although he didn't actually do the investigation. He just came to talk about it. And they were paid $55,000 for this last-minute witness. Your tax money at work. And according to experts, again, like Roger Ver, he said the prosecutors in the trial have no clue how Bitcoin works or are intentionally lying about it. And so we wanted to be able to challenge that and explain to the jury what was true about Bitcoin. And Andreas Antonopoulos was ready to do that pro bono, no charge. And nope, he can't testify. Reason? Well, it's irrelevant and unnecessary because the jury understands Bitcoin just fine. So, the appeal says, by precluding the defense experts who would have countered the complex testimony presented by the government, Ulbricht was denied his Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights to present a defense. So, the government says, no, it was right to stop these witnesses because disclosure of the witnesses, was too late. The paperwork wasn't filed on time, which our lawyers dispute, and it wasn't enough information. And so the judge was right to protect the government against trial by ambush, which I find very amusing since they, starting with the bail hearing, were conducting ambushes all the time, dumping last-minute things on the defense a lot. So she was correct, and they recited what they claimed was the law that says that this was right, and they didn't mention that the same law says you cannot exclude defense experts for inadequate or late disclosures. The idea of the law is that due process rights are more important than late paperwork. But I guess being a true bureaucrat, that judge thought paperwork was more important, so they were denied. So, to sum up, the defense was not allowed to have discovery regarding the forced corruption. They still haven't had it all. Some of it is still sealed. They were not allowed to tell the jury about the corruption investigation or the fact that there were two agents who had freewheeling access to the site and the evidence they were looking at. They were not allowed to pursue the government investigation into an alternate perpetrator. They were not allowed to challenge the government testimony regarding the laptop investigation or Bitcoin, and they were not allowed to present defense experts to counter the government testimony. And yet, they say, oh no, the defense was free to pursue the alternate perpetrator theory. Why? Because the government says so. It says they were free. They didn't say how they were free. I don't see how they were going to do it. Okay, so the next issue in the appeal and in the reply is regards the Fourth Amendment, which of course you know is a foundational law. It's a foundational Bill of Rights that guards our privacy and ensures that we have a free life. It's essential. And one of the things about it is it requires particularity. You can't, and it says, particularly describing. You can't just rummage through someone's house from attic to basement to see what you can find. Go on a fishing expedition. And not only does the appeal say this, that the government used improper warrants called general warrants, not specific, but general. But the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and EFF joined the appeal saying, yeah, this was wrong. They used general warrants. They're the kind of warrants that we fought the Revolutionary War for, and that the Fourth Amendment was created to prevent. And they're saying that they did exactly those same things with Ross's laptop, Facebook, and Gmail accounts. Now the government goes, no, just because the warrants authorize searching for all Ross Ulbricht's writings and all evidence relating to travel and other general information doesn't mean they weren't specific. And even if there was some problem with the warrants, the judge was still correct in not suppressing any of the evidence because, well, the government agents relied on the warrants in good faith. They had good faith. So why did we know they have good faith? The government says so. So it's okay to use improper warrants as long as you have a good attitude about it, basically. Now, Joshua Dratel, our lawyer, explained to me, he goes, if this had been a physical file cabinet and they'd gone and taken files out of it without specifying, it would have been clearly unconstitutional. There'd be no argument about it. But because it's digital, it's not protected. This is what the government's saying. And, we all know a laptop is a file cabinet on steroids. It's a gateway to all kinds of private information. And basically what they're saying, it's not protected. The founders forgot to put that bit about laptops in the Bill of Rights. I mean, they were very lax about that, I guess. And they're saying that we have to surrender our privacy because we don't, use paper and landlines now. Very important question for the digital age, and one that's being argued in more than one case, that they can just seize digital property and not have to worry about the Fourth Amendment. Another issue, huge issue in my mind of the appeal, is the abominable Draconian sentence that this judge gave Ross. To me, it's a raw abuse of government power. The Eighth Amendment of the Constitution says, cruel and unusual punishment shall not be inflicted. It's a very unusual sentence for nonviolent charges, certainly cruel. And the Supreme Court rulings say sentences that are barbarous, outrageous, inhumane, or that shock the social consciousness are unconstitutional. But according to the government, the life sentence was entirely reasonable. The judge meticulously examined the facts, the law, and the defense arguments and made a dispassionate review of the evidence. Now, the truth is, she relied on unsubstantiated, unproven allegations that were never even brought to trial, never even mentioned at trial, claiming that 6 deaths occurred because of Silk Road, and vaguely stating that, well, in some way they related to Silk Road, and that's enough. So, she never specified how the conduct was related to the drug overdose deaths, and she said whether it was a factor in causing their death, a contributing factor, or just somehow related to their deaths. in close association is not a decision that we have to make for today's purposes. And I'm saying, if it's not today, the sentencing, when exactly do we make this decision? So, wasn't made. Well, it was made. They decided it was valid. And she totally ignored a pathology report submitted by a medical pathologist who has 30 years experience, who said the accusations that Silk Road was directly connected with these deaths was incomplete, unreliable, and inaccurate. And the government replies in this brief and says the evidence they presented at sentencing outweighed the evidence from the pathologist. So basically they're saying the judge and the prosecutor can ignore the opinion of a medical expert and substitute their own opinions, and that is reasonable. And of course we know why that's reasonable, because the government says so. So another little side thing is that the government seized the Silk Road server 3 or 4 months before they took it down, and 2 of those deaths occurred during that time frame. So are they also guilty? Are they also responsible? They haven't mentioned that. The other, there's lots of things in the sentencing that I could talk about for a long time, but another thing the judge said is the sentence would deter others from doing what she says Ross did. This is despite research that says these big sentences are no deterrent, but even more, despite the fact that there are a proliferation of these dark web sites way bigger than Silk Road ever was. It hasn't deterred anything. But the government said the judge properly considered general and specific deterrents to warn all others who might contemplate internet drug internet drug sales. The Congress in the 1984 passed what's called the Sentencing Reform Act, and it says that a judge should impose a sentence that is sufficient but not greater than necessary. They were concerned that there were a lot of unfair sentencing. There was a lot of unfair sentencing going on, and this judge said why this was necessary. Never backed that up. And this is the kind of sentence that this act of Congress was designed to avoid. The other thing it's supposed to avoid, besides extremely harsh sentences, is sentences that are disproportionate, so that they felt that if one person did a similar crime to another person, they should get kind of the same ballpark of sentencing. And yet, the appeal says that this sentence of Ross has a grotesque disparity. For example, the leading drug seller on Silk Road got 10 years. The biggest he's convicted as the biggest cocaine and heroin seller on Silk Road. He got 5 years. Peter Nash, a senior admin during the height of Silk Road, and during the time that some of these overdose deaths occurred, and that was never mentioned at his sentencing, he got 17 months. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad. But Ross got, as creator and admin, double life without parole plus 40 years. In addition, the corrupt agents, got 6 years and 7 years. And recently, Brian Farrell, who was known as Dr. Clue on Silk Road 2.0, he got 8 years. And yet, the government says Ross's sentence is reasonable because they say so. So why the disparity? Why Ross? I mean, the judge said, hey, you're no better than a common drug dealer on the street. And Cody Wilson said, well, so why don't you sentence him as one then? But they make it clear why. Ross, it was a political threat in their view. So was Tor, so is Bitcoin. It's not about the product, it's not about drugs. It's obvious from these sentences, it's about the platform. It could not be tolerated. He had to be an example. It's kind of like putting the head on the spike in a medieval castle. That'll happen to you. Of course, no one's paying attention to it. They have all these sites. She also said she wasn't sure Ross had abandoned his political beliefs. And she had to punish him because of that. His views, because maybe he still has them, and she thinks they're very dangerous. She referenced DPR's writings at sentencing and the site's political philosophy. And this is a quote from her: "Silk Road's birth and its presence asserted that its creator, you, and its operator were better than the laws of this country, and there are posts which discuss the laws as the oppressor." Not necessarily his post, by the way, just on the site, "and that each transaction is a victory over the oppressor. This is deeply troubling and terribly misguided and also very dangerous." Now, a lawyer I know commented, he goes, "Well, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison wouldn't do very well in Catherine Forrest's court for their equally dangerous views." So, this woman who took an oath to defend the First Amendment and free speech and political speech, used political views to bolster this draconian sentence. It's very sobering when you think about it. And so I didn't used to want to say this because I thought, oh, this is being hyperbolic, but I do believe Ross is a political prisoner. After seeing those sentences, other people, I don't think he was about drugs at all. He's being made an example. He's been made the poster boy of the dark web and of the drug war, and as such, he's a prisoner of war. This is a picture of me. I was brought to Eastern Europe to speak last fall, and we went to Poland, and we went to Auschwitz concentration camp. That's where I am. Very grim, very sobering experience. And I overheard a tour guide say, "The lesson here, watch your politicians. This wasn't that long ago. This can happen." Oh, wait. Sorry. Don't want to do that yet. So we're at a crossroads in history. We're leaving the 20th century. We've left the 20th century. We're in the 21st century. We're going into the digital age. Things are happening really fast and changing really quickly. And the courts are grappling with new uncharted territory, and things that they decide in the courts now are going to affect all of us going forward for a very long time. So the question is, will the trend be towards liberty and privacy and innovation, or is it going to be towards government control and intrusion? That's the question. A lot of people ask me, who's Ross? What's he like? Who is he? And I would say that he is one of you. This is a picture of a close-up of the first Student for Liberty t-shirt he signed. It's hanging in the office in the Washington, D.C. office of Students for Liberty. They nominated him this year as one of the alumnus of the year. Here he is with Ron Paul at Penn State. He's at the bottom left, kneeling. He's one of you. He'd fit in here really well. He's one of you, and he needs your help. We cannot fight this alone. We're one family. We're not rich. The government is rich and very powerful and relentless. We can't fight alone. And there are really important issues here that'll affect all of us, not just our family, not just Ross. We've gotten a lot of help, a lot from the people in this room, many of you. We got this far because of it. But the bills keep coming, the government keeps coming, and just one example, we got it, and it's not always the lawyers. I mean, we got a bill for over $13,000 to compile hard copies in bound form for the 3 appellate judges and send them a digital copy. Over $13,000. And I'm like, could I put this together myself? And they said, well, if you make a mistake, they've been known to throw out a case if it's not perfect. We have to pay it. and experts and the pathologists and all these other people besides the lawyers who are really being patient. We owe them a lot of money. So I just want to say, if you care about liberty, you care about privacy, you're against the drug war, please help us how you can. I know everybody doesn't have a lot of money, but if you could give what you can, it adds up. And there's lots of ways at freerots.org to help us, and it's ideas. We have a Take Action page. We had an art project that was based on an idea Ross, actually it came to him in a dream, where we used a picture that and actually you can see it on a poster back there later, and buy one, of the trial through his eyes, through a mask. And thanks to Derek Slopey of Agorist Hosting, and who made it possible to have this as a game online, and Drew Phillips, and we were able to put this game up, and people could click a square for $1, and they revealed the game, and we raised $6,000 or so. Plus, we're selling posters. And we had a lot of fun. And Tim Fry of Roberts & Roberts made it really fun because he made it a treasure hunt where he put random grams of gold that the lucky person who landed on it got a gram of gold. So it really got exciting. And now we have a new game. We finished that one. As of tomorrow, you can still bid on the original, and we'll have the posters up for, we'll always have the posters in the store. And the new one is completely different. It's called Two-Faced Tango. And so I just invite you to come play with us and help us bring attention to these big issues, and just join us in this fight. It's bigger than Ross. It's bigger than Silk Road. It's kind of a pivotal battle that we're all in. I want to end this with a video, and it's the first art game unfolding, and it's played to the music of a very beautiful, talented freedom fighter, Tatiana Moroz, who wrote this song for Ross. So, makes me cry and get chills every time I hear this song.
There was a man who did the unspoken. He looked for freedom from the violence. No one is perfect when there's new ground broken. A mess is made and someone gets blamed. He had a dream of harmony as you wish to live out your own. We cannot stand for this, cannot have you fall along the Silk Road. This ain't the movies, there's a war in the streets. The innocent are in jail. We pray for justice and we wanna be free, and hope the truth will prevail. He had a dream of harmony as you wish to live out your own. We cannot stand for this, cannot have you fall along the Silk Road. We still have hope, we cannot quit. Don't be afraid. We have a voice and this is it. Let the light show the way. the Silk Road. We cannot stand first, cannot have you fall along the Silk Road.
Thank you. So I invite you to buy a poster, play the game, help us. Appreciate all your support here. It's so great to be here at Porcfest. And Ross called, and I just tell him how much love and support there is here, and it really means a lot to him and to me. Thank you.